Hello, everybody, and either welcome or welcome back to my podcast. As always, I'd like to remind everybody, if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Spotify. So this episode is going to be a little different from all of my other episodes. This is going to be basically a kind of re-promote and a rebroadcast of the interview that I did with Mance Rayder about a week and a half ago. Basically, what had happened was, the week before last, I was on vacation. I was up in New York City, where I always love going up there, always have a wonderful time. But because of that and the vacation brain that goes along with that, I kind of had forgotten that this past week was going to be especially brutal because I didn't work the week before that. And so because of that, a couple social obligations came through. My dad came through town, different things like that. I really didn't have time to record a full podcast this week. But I didn't want to leave you guys hanging, so I wanted to give you guys something. So this is this. If you hadn't listened to it before, I know I tweeted about it before, but just in case, here you go. Like I said, I didn't want to leave you guys hanging, so I did want to give you something. I will be back on my regular schedule this week. I will be posting up on Thursday, and I may do a second one on Sunday too, depending on how the schedule works out. But here you go. This is my interview with Mance Rayder. We're discussing my episode from a few weeks back on toxic intersectionality and white guilt and kind of some of the concepts that I go over in that. So here you go. I hope you enjoy it.
Hey, Jen. So I wanted to ask you about this podcast you did, I think it was 2 podcasts ago, on intersectionality. Most libertarians see terms like intersectionality and their eyes roll back into their heads far enough that they get a headache. What made you decide you wanted to do a podcast on intersectionality?
Well, I saw both of these 2 pieces that I discussed in my podcast come down my timeline, and they were both kind of like, they're kind of like bookend pieces where you've got the Apaya piece that I talk about, basically discussing the idea that intersectionality isn't really something that should be used as some kind of identifier for a person or something that will tell you anything about a person. And then the other half of it, the white guilt opinion, well, it's not an opinion piece. It's supposed to be an advice column from what I understand. But the whole idea of somebody just completely buying into intersectionality and identifying themselves solely as a straight white female, as this person was. And just completely buying into that concept and allowing that to be your whole identity and having nothing outside of that. So I just thought it was interesting to have like kind of both of those pieces show up at the same time. And so I kind of wanted to do a podcast discussing kind of the compare and contrast between the 2 pieces, basically. And so that's how that started.
So I know you talked about some of the origins of intersectionality. How did intersectionality come into the modern discussion?
Well, it started out in the feminist movement and second wave feminism. And the concept of intersectionality was introduced as a way of trying to explain like kind of the criticism and the knock against feminism is that it's for upper class white women, basically. And intersectionality was introduced as a way of trying to explain to other feminists that, okay, your experiences as a upper middle class white woman are not the same as my experiences as a lower middle class black woman or as a lesbian woman or as anything like that. Try to like broaden it into a way to try to explain that different people have different experiences, but intersectionality, it basically started concentrating on identifying people and their experiences through race, through sexuality, through like socioeconomic status. And when it was first introduced, like I understand what they were doing. I understand the point that those who were promoting it were trying to make. But we've gotten so far afield of that where it's now being applied to everybody. And this idea of labeling people is starting to become weaponized and is starting to be used against people to basically marginalize certain groups of people because you're not this race or you're not this sexuality, or you don't understand me because you can't understand me because you have this label and not that label. So it's something that kind of, I think it started with decent enough intentions, but it's just snowballed into something that's really turned into basically just ugliness and name calling and trying to label people and trying to understand people through a paradigm of solely looking at their race or their sexuality or anything like that, and not viewing people as individuals who each have their own stories outside of anything that you could see externally, basically.
I think it's interesting that you say that it was started because it seemed like feminism at that point was, upper middle class white women, and, black women need to get involved. We need to get minorities involved. I mean, since then, how many black women have even joined? I mean, when you see feminism in the, especially third wave feminism now, what's the percentage of black women you even see in it? How has that even helped them?
Well, see, and that's the thing. And it's funny that intersectionality was kind of brought up as a way to try to explain these different experiences to feminists, because that's still the knock even today against third wave, fourth wave, whatever wave we're on, is that it's for white women of a certain socioeconomic class. So we still haven't gotten to where those who kind of introduced the idea of intersectionality wanted feminism to be. So it's funny to think about in that way, that it was brought up through the feminist movement, because the feminist movement still really hasn't truly embraced like women of color, even though they say they do. But really, especially when you look at things like the Women's March and stuff like that, it's predominantly white women of financial means. I mean, that's what feminism's always been. That's kind of still what it is. And that's, like I said, that's really one of the knocks against feminism that still exists to this day.
Yeah, it seems like whenever I see these groups, I don't see Asian women included. It seems like it targets one group, and they've cornered the market on it, basically. And it's upper class white women.
Yeah, the inclusion problem still exists, so they still got some work to do there. But again, it's kind of that idea, especially with feminism, the third wave, the fourth wave, whatever, that they've really bought into the idea of intersectionality, but they haven't embraced the whole idea behind intersectionality. So it's kind of funny to look at from the outside and be like, well, you tried to adopt something, but you didn't really understand the point that those who were promoting the intersectionality were trying to make to you. Like, you still haven't kind of wrapped your head around that.
And it also seems that you're trying to, I mean, this is probably some of the most anti-individual talk that we can have on a libertarian podcast. I mean, these aren't people that care about individuals.
No, and that's where I think intersectionality has kind of gone astray, is now you're starting to put people into little boxes based on their skin color and based on their sexuality and based on this, that, and the other. And it's very reductive to me. It's very anti-individualist, because you're trying to view people in this certain little paradigm, and you're using these certain very strict definitions of people to be like, okay, well, you are a lesbian, transgender person of color, so this tells me something about you. Like, that tells you nothing about somebody. That kind of strips people of their individuality, and that's my problem with it.
So where do white men fit in this?
You don't. Didn't you get the memo? You're all supposed to die or cancel yourselves or go be somewhere else, apparently. But that's kind of where we get to the point of intersectionality being weaponized, because it's become this thing where the worst insult that these people can hurl at somebody is cis white male. Like, if you are a straight white male, you are scum of the earth. Like, your opinions mean nothing. You are garbage. You are not invited to the conversation. Please just get the fuck out, cancel yourselves, the end. So that's where really the weaponization comes in, is you're starting to use labels against people and to marginalize people.
I think the interesting thing from the Kwame Anthony piece is he starts talking about how people will start conversations or start giving opinions like, well, as a white man, what if you asked somebody in Japan what their opinion of, can you describe a white man? Well, how would they describe a white man?
Yeah, and that's the point I made, is like, if you're going to, and the point that Paya does make in the piece is that if you're going to say straight white man. Like, well, straight white man looks different in different parts of this country, let alone different parts of the world. So if you're using that as an identifier, that doesn't really tell you anything. And even Appiah makes the point in the piece, if you say straight white male, you can come up with a man bun wearing kombucha drinking dude, or you can come up with a guy with a MAGA hat and one of those flag tank tops and drinking Miller Lite. So it's like, that tells you nothing about a person just by saying, okay, that's a straight white male. I'm like, okay, cool. That tells me nothing about that person.
And you also had made mention of something in there where a woman in London had pointed to a man sitting on a park bench.
The head gay. It's the king of the gays. I don't know.
What's the whole thought process behind that?
I guess, and I know there's certain people that kind of, and this is where intersectionality also comes in, is like if you put enough labels on somebody, they become like the head something or another. Like it's this weird like ladder hierarchy where you kind of climb it. And it's like if you've got 2 labels, you're kind of down here. But if you've got like 5 labels, you're up here. And then you get to be the head whatever. You get to be the head gay, or you get to be the head black person, or you get to be the head lesbian or transgender person, or whatever ladder you're on. There's like, you get that hierarchy going on. And that's another thing that's really kind of weird to me. It's like you're labeling people and you're also putting them in a hierarchy based on these labels that really tell you nothing about a person. And especially with that guy that you mentioned, that the head gay, like, how does she even know that he's gay in the first place? Like, how did you come to the fact that he's the head gay? Like, maybe he might not even be gay for all you know.
Well, one phrase that you used in there that I thought was brilliant, I don't know if it was yours or if it was from the piece, was the authenticity Olympics. Talking about, and
yeah, you know, that was me.
That was you? Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the most obvious ones that we see on Twitter, and I think we've seen Twitter in the past week, where people are talking about, you know, are you black enough? Or, you know, are you oppressed enough? So,
yeah, that's why I wanted to mention that in the discussion of that piece, because they were talking about a specific book that was written. And this is something that I think goes back to before intersectionality became a thing in like mainstream culture, is that within the Black community, there's always been that question of authenticity. Like, are you black enough? Like, if you're black and you were born in Calabasas, all of a sudden you're less black than somebody who was born in the Bronx or somewhere down south. It's like there's this like competition of, are you XYZ enough? And you also start to see this in like gay culture, in transgender culture, everything like that, where it's like, are you like, do you have enough labels to be authentic? Like, or is there somebody who is more whatever than you? And then that person's opinion gets raised above yours because they have more social credit in this system, basically. And I guess we could talk about social credit too, because that's becoming a thing nowadays where people are actually trying to like, I think Facebook is trying to do something like that. I know they're trying to do it over in Japan where like social credit is an actual thing that people are judged by. But I think that comes back a lot to intersectionality too, and this idea of labeling people and putting them in a hierarchy.
All right. So the next thing that I wanted to go to was the white guilt letter, which is, I guess, it was an advice column.
Allegedly? This is horrible advice, by the way. This is a horrible advice column. And,
I mean, the real question when you read it is whether it's Poe or not. Because it sounds like it could be tongue-in-cheek, but it takes itself a little too seriously. I don't know. I've gone back and forth on it. Yeah, like you see what I'm saying, right? I can't tell if this is trolling or if this is like dead serious. Like, I can't tell. It really could go either way. And I think that says a lot to where we're at right now, especially as far as like racial identifiers go, and the idea of white guilt is that it's reached this point where it's Poe's law. Like, you can't tell if this is real or trolling anymore. So one of the first things let's talk about some of the responses, because as absurd as the column is, and if it is in fact written, with sarcasm, written as just to try to expose just exactly how ridiculous this thinking is, the responses were very real and very scary.
Yeah, it was. I'm going to take it in the spirit of it being a serious letter, because that's the spirit that the advice columnist took it in. So I'll run with that. But it's the idea of this woman who identifies herself as whitey, which I can't get over that. But it's the idea that she wrote in saying that, well, she was born and raised in Harlem, blah, 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 blah. Now she goes to this elite coastal private university that's 75% white. And she's feeling a little weird about the situation, and kind of the idea of feeling quote unquote white guilt, which I still don't thoroughly understand what white guilt is supposed to be. But their responses to her in a nutshell, because they kind of go back and forth. There's two different people giving the advice. And the advice in a nutshell to me is that not only should you be feeling guilty for being white, it's somehow your job to lean into this guilt and to feel it and to process it so that people of color can feel better around you, I guess. I'm not entirely sure. But I say it's just a horrible advice column, because it's I thought you were supposed to write into an advice column and they're supposed to give you advice to help make you feel better, not make you feel worse. And I can just see if I wrote this letter and this was the response I got, I'd be I feel even shittier now than I did before I wrote the letter. What the hell? But yeah, it's just this whole idea that they that somehow as a white person, you were supposed to inherit the guilt of your ancestors, I guess, which, I mean, depending on your personal ethnic makeup, your ancestors can be a bunch of different people, be they oppressors, be they people that were oppressed. So this whole idea that if you are a certain melanin color, you should feel guilty about it is something that is a little weird to me. And it's also something I don't think anybody would ever feel comfortable saying to anybody other than a white person. You would never tell a black person, yeah, you should feel bad about your skin color, because now you're tiptoeing close to Jim Crow laws and how black people were made to feel under those. And you would never tell a Latin person, you should probably feel bad about your brown skin. You should feel guilty about that. So it's just this really creepy kind of reverse racism in a way of making people feel that they should feel a certain way because of their skin color.
Well, you made the point, and I want you to explain it, that this intersectionality, especially the responses, leaned heavily on Marxism.
Yeah, there's definitely a strain of this intersectionality movement where the idea is that you can get to an egalitarian society by labeling people through the way intersectionality does. And to me, that seems really ass backwards. I mean, how are you going to be egalitarian if you're labeling people and judging people based on those labels? But there is that strain of Marxism that comes in, that there's these people that think if we just have enough labels, somehow we'll all be equal, which makes no sense. How are you going to label people and then have them be equal? That makes no sense.
You know what this does? This creates some kind of fucked up caste system.
It does. It really fucking does. Where you've got people that based on their amount of labels are judged to be better or more worthy of having their opinions heard and taken seriously than people who have less labels or who have the wrong labels, going back to the cis white male thing. That's, like I said, that's the worst thing. That's an insult to these people. They think to call somebody a cis white male is to basically be you're an untouchable. You're an undesirable. Society doesn't want you. We don't want to hear you. We don't want to see you. We want you gone. So yeah, comparing it to India's caste system really does make sense. It lines up.
But you know what it also does? It basically, it's white supremacy. They don't realize it. They're basically saying that white people are superior, so we need to knock them down. I mean, to me, these people really do not have it's like weird inverted version of the KKK's message, or, just any kind of white supremacy message. They're basically saying, well, we can't compete with just your whole existence, so we need to marginalize you.
That's an interesting point, and it's something I was thinking of actually from the opposite direction, because in one of the responses to that letter, they use the phrase white supremacist culture, which I think I'm starting to see this happen more and more, especially with the intersectional left, of trying to reclaim the phrase of white supremacy or white supremacist to label it as, I guess, what they would consider a white-dominated culture. And I guess in their worldview, that is a thing, but white supremacy and white supremacist is a hell of a lot closer to what you just described, like thinking that white people are superior. So I see them trying to like co-opt that and try to pull it over to their side. And it's like, no, you're using the term white supremacy wrong. Like that doesn't mean what you think it means. Like saying we live in a white supremacist culture is factually incorrect, because it's not like we live in a culture where all the white people think that they're superior to all the other people. Like that would be a white supremacist culture. So that's interesting that you brought that up.
You also mentioned something that I want you to explain. You talked about how this is really like a zero-sum game with power imbalances. Yeah.
I mean, it is. And that kind of also goes to the idea behind Marxism and everything, too, of basically viewing life as a zero-sum game. Like if you have a thing and the thing is finite, everything is finite to these people. If one person has it, the other person cannot have it because this person has it. So it does kind of engender that whole zero-sum game of you have to somehow get all the things. Like they're like little Pokemons. You got to like catch them all. And there's only so many of them. So if you have this many, that means somebody else doesn't have them. Instead of viewing life as just people being individuals and it's not a zero-sum game. Like I can have an identity, you can have an identity, everybody listening to this can have their own identity. And it doesn't take anything away from anybody else. We can all have things. It's not, we don't have to like take from each other. Like everybody can just have their own identity and it's fine, it's okay. And it's not this weird zero-sum game that Marxists like to turn everything into, apparently, because that's how they view life.
When you were commenting on this this opinion piece and the two people that responded, you threw out a bunch of terms that I thought I'd want you to explain, because the way you explained them made a lot of sense. You also said that it basically what they're trying to do is create situational racial minorities.
Yeah, and that was funny to me, because any kind of racial minority is a situational racial minority. Like you can go to different parts of even this country, even whatever state you live, whatever city you live in. And as a white person, like there's neighborhoods I can go into where I would be a situational racial minority because it's a predominantly black neighborhood. So it was funny to me to hear somebody label it like that, because I'm just like, what the fuck? All racial minorities are situational racial minorities. Like that makes no sense. It was just a really weird phrasing that they used that I thought was kind of funny. So I wanted to highlight that.
I think the one where you got the most indignant on was the person who was giving their opinion to Whitey. His name was Steve.
It's still hilarious.
That's really what leads me to believe that it's sarcasm, that it was Poe. But Steve says to seek out causes that are more pointed towards the disenfranchised, even if it basically would screw over white people. If white people, if they were able to create some kind of movement where white people's power or their ability to basically do anything could be suppressed, that was something that he said to seek out and run with.
Yeah, and that's so weird to me. And it kind of strikes me to pull in like a different example from what we're talking about. But this idea that like as a woman, it is incumbent upon you to act and dress and speak and comport yourself in a certain way to avoid unwanted or violent or any kind of misogynistic male attention. Like, why would it be incumbent on this nice white girl from East Harlem to comport her life in such a way to make other people comfortable? Like, why do you want to put that on somebody? That's not somebody else's job. It's not my job to make anybody else feel more comfortable. It's not her job to put herself in a position where maybe she might be denigrating herself to make other people feel better. Like, that makes no sense to me. It's not on you to do that for somebody else. It's on other people to get themselves to where they need to be so that they can act right in decent society. Like, it's not incumbent upon anybody to arrange their life to make somebody else's life easier or more comfortable or presumably better for other people.
Yeah. Their explanations make no sense. Basically, in their world, and we live in Atlanta, which is, I think it's the city in the world that has the most black millionaires. And I meet through my business all the time, black millionaires. Their sons are becoming their sons are going to medical school, daughters are going to law school. They're some of the most successful, nicest people you'll ever meet. Apparently, those people, according to them, have it harder in life than the white people that Jeffrey Dahmer lured up to his house and killed.
Yeah, because if you're white, that's all that matters. Like, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter where you were born, what your circumstances were, if you were rich, if you were poor, if you lived a charmed life, if you were abused. It doesn't matter. If you are white, then somehow your life has been just like sunshine and lollipops, and everybody else's life sucks in comparison to yours, which is insane. That's absolutely fucking insane.
Well, the one guy, Steve, when he was commenting, he basically said that in order for justice to be served, in order for the scales to be tipped back in the right direction, white people must accept harder lives. That, anybody who's white should be willing to accept living a harder life, what sounds to me, that just sounds like communism, sounds like Marxism. If everybody's going to be equal, you should be able to go without.
Yeah, everybody's life's going to be equally shitty, and that's how it works out, the end. But I want to pull up the one, because I think I know which one you're talking about. And, well, actually, maybe this one isn't, but I think it is worth talking about. Sorry, I'm just going to completely hijack your podcast now, but here it is, the quote. The rise of political actors and demagogues who promote white supremacy, misogyny, and racism is, in part, an effort by the privileged to reject these truths. They've created an ecstatic cult of victimization and recast pursuit of justice as an assault on their selfhood. Which, I mean, it goes back to what you were talking about, but I made the point in the podcast that you can't bitch about other people deciding that they are going to play the game that you played. Like, all of a sudden, if you decided that blacks can be victims because of their skin color, if Latinos can be victims, if Asians can be victims, if anybody can be a victim based on their skin color, don't get pissy when the white people start doing it too, because eventually they're going to start playing your game. And that is what's happening. And I think Trump did kind of tap into a lot of this, the idea of white victimization and of these people losing their culture, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean. But yeah, it's interesting to me to see people start to bitch that other people are playing their game.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what the Trump people are saying. The Trump people are saying, well, if they're going to get our people, fired from their jobs, and we're going to get their people fired from their jobs. And it's not that I want to see a discussion, because I don't think any discussion can be had with these people. I think they're utterly insane. And, I'm talking about both sides. Both sides are completely nuts. But specifically the people on the left, these absolute lunatics. I mean, there's no discussion to be had with them. And to want to be, to keep pretending that this country needs to stay together, that one person represents 350 million people, and that, I'm going to be able to agree 80 to 90% with some purple-haired Trigglypuff that just came off of a college campus, and that we're going to be able to decide, that person should even have a say in my life, in my decisions, is just insane. So both sides are ignoring the obvious answer to all this is to split up and go make go do what you want over here, create your little civilization here, go create your psychotic socialist ethno state over there, and have your communist nut job state over there. And let's stop trying to have a conversation, and or maybe they just like fighting with each other, and that's why they don't want to do that.
I think there is something to the whole fighting thing, but yeah, I would be down with 50 nation states, and then everybody can just go live in whatever state they want to, which is why I think it kind of sucked when they took off the ballot when California was going to split into 3 states. I wanted to see that vote go down. Like, no, let them do it. Let them secede. Let them turn themselves into 3 different states. Go for it. But again, and kind of going back to the idea of people viewing life as a zero-sum game, you see this with a lot of Trump supporters, where it's like, okay, well, if the immigrants can have this, then we can't have it. Like, it's this really weird, reductive way of looking at life as everything being like this finite pot of anything, and that if somebody else has something, that means you can't have it. And it's really weird. It's really reductivist. And you're right. It's very Soviet. It's very Marxist. It's very socialist. This idea that it's all finite, and if I have it, you can't have it.
Well, the podcast before the one we were talking about today, I think you did a great job of explaining why reverse racism exists. Because there's this whole argument that's absolutely just gives me a migraine that minorities, people of color, whatever people of color, just reverse that and think about what people called people 30, 40 years ago. That this idea that you can't be racist against white people. I think you did a great job of just absolutely destroying that one. So can you talk a little bit about what you talked about in that podcast?
Sure. Well, I mean, we both you and I grew up in multicultural societies, so we know for a fact that minorities can be racist towards other minorities. They can be racist towards white people. I mean, anybody can be racist towards anybody for anything. But the point I was trying to make, it's this weird new kind of definition of racism that it involves an oppressor and an oppressed, which if you look at the actual Merriam-Webster definition of racism, power is not mentioned at all. Racism is the belief that you are superior to another person based on your race or your ethnicity. That's what racism is, full stop. So this whole weird idea that like black people or minorities can't be racist because like white people hold more power than people of color, it makes no sense. Like, you're trying to redefine racism in a way that is not the definition of racism. And moreover to that point, if you want to go with the Merriam-Webster definition of racism, is not the idea that as a person of color, it's okay for you to go on social media and basically say like, fuck white people, or like Sarah Zhang said, that cancel white people, or that white people should like go live underground like hobbits because we're pale and we're not very good at being out in the sun. Like, is that not you asserting that you are better than somebody else based on your race? And I would say that, yeah, it is, because you're holding yourself up over white people because you're not a white person and you feel like it's okay to just talk shit about white people on the internet. Like, that to me is a lot closer to the actual definition of racism than this weird oppressor-oppressed power struggle thing is that certain people on the left are trying to make racism into.
Well, and it's also one of two things. Either you're saying, and we talked about this before, because you're so much superior than us, you need to be marginalized, or you're saying that you're inferior to us and that you don't matter. So
yeah, it's so weird. Like, it's a hard one for me because I don't really understand defining oneself in the milieu of one's race. Like, I don't think about these sorts of things, and I guess some people would call that my white privilege. But it's a weird mindset for me to think about, that people sit down and think like, okay, well, as a black person or as a straight person or lesbian or as a transgender person or a gender fluid person, that any of this like affects your day-to-day thinking and your opinions and your thoughts on things. Like I don't really take into account like my melanin level or my genitalia when I'm coming up with ideas. Like I don't understand this.
Well, no, you just want the best ideas. You want the market of ideas. And let's just bring this back to the free market. If people just went with and listened and debated the best ideas, it would be a good thing. And you just let everyone else decide. But no, This is your ideas don't matter because whitey.
Yeah. And to bring it back to a point that I meant to make before, we were talking about how it would be best if we all just broke up and got our own little nation states. I think a lot of what's going on with the left and the people that want to make this argument is that they do want to argue with people. They don't want to be like segregated. They don't want to do the logical thing and just go off and make their own little community and go do whatever the fuck they want. They want to tell everybody else what to do. They want all of society to mirror what they want. And it's an incredibly selfish, narrow-minded, short-sighted thing to want for society. Like, who the fuck are you? Like, why is your opinion important? Why should I have to arrange my life in a way to make you happy?
Well, I think Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center made a good point about that is, because he constantly talks about, this needs to be broken up. He even talks about 10,000 city-states, invoking Hoppe's famous speech from 1996. And he makes the point that, yes, the left will, if you were to... anytime you bring up the 10th Amendment, you just want to have slavery. So, they don't want to break up because, our city state, of course, is going to have slavery because, we believe, I quoted the 10th Amendment at some time. But he also makes the point that people on the right, especially Christian conservatives, won't like it either because, oh my God, that leftist state over there might have legal abortion and we won't be able to do anything about it. We won't be able to talk bad about it. We won't have any power over them.
Exactly. It's not that these people want, like I said, they don't want to do the logical thing. They want to impose their will upon everybody. So that's why, I wouldn't mind seeing, actually, I take that back. I'm not entirely ready to see like a complete fracturization of society because I don't know how exactly logistically that would work out. But kind of, I don't know. I'm not ready to completely break up yet, but I do understand those who are, and I do understand those who have decided that this is not a conversation that they're willing to have with certain people because I get it. Like there are people that this would be, it's an exercise in futility. But I do think there are still some people out there who can be reached. Maybe this is just my optimism, but I'm not entirely ready to go that route yet.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up there. Talk about your podcast. Why don't you talk about why you started it, what you like most talking about on your podcast, and where people can find it.
Okay. Well, it's under Agenda Libertarian. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Spotify now. The reason I started it was basically I wanted a forum in which to kind of work through these sorts of thoughts and ideas in something that's a little more of a long format rather than like tweets and stuff like that. I was looking for something a little more long form, which this has actually somewhat turned into. Like my podcasts go way longer now than I ever thought they would. But yeah, that's kind of the genesis of that. So yeah, you can find me there. You can also find me on Twitter under Agenda Libertarian. And trying to think of anything else I want to mention. I think that's about it.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk again.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.
You too. So there you go. My interview with Mance Rayder. As always, I hope you did enjoy it. Thank you for making it all the way through. If you do like this, as always, I'd like to remind everybody, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Spotify. Take care, and until next time.